Does anime really need an introduction? No, not really. Well, its impact as a whole is still not to be understated. It mostly had a big impact in the West, but also other countries were impacted as well, which we're gonna get into today. The history of his impact is long and quite interesting, so let's dive right into it, shall we?
It's like one of my Japanese animes.
But what even is this anime that I speak of? It's literally just the Japanese word for animation. It's literally in the name, actually. I know for some of you, anime means something entirely different, and by and large, yes, anime as a whole is very different from Western animation. But as a whole, the Japanese just consider animation as anime, which, yes, technically means something like SpongeBob or even King of the Hill can be considered anime. I know some of you might not particularly agree with that, but that is technically the definition. Oh, and in case you're wondering, yes, the Japanese do have their own debate on whether subs or dubs are better, especially for things like King of the Hill.
It's good to know such petty conflicts still exist worldwide.
I know, it's great!
That was sarcasm, you dunce.
I know, it's great! But yeah, Japan's general culture as a whole is very different from the West. They're a lot more lax and experimental in some regards, and a lot more strict in other regards. I'm going to have to word this very carefully in case YouTube decides to bunk me upside the head for saying the wrong thing. Let's just say Japan has weird censorship laws when it comes to expandong, in particularly adult kinds of anime, you know the ones. I'm of course talking about very fashionable female chickens.
Oh, how original, ripping yourself off now, are we?
Hey, if it works, it works. But you can especially see the cultural difference with something like Super Sentai, or as we know in the West, Power Rangers. Although Power Rangers is very different from Super Sentai and actually has completely different actors. Yeah, the action scenes are dubbed over, but Power Rangers has completely new actors and completely new scenes made just for Power Rangers. It's also based off of Japanese Spider-Man.
Please tell me you're joking.
I wish I was, but Japanese Spider-Man technically came first. And he's his own entire beast. I could honestly cover an entire video. Maybe I'll make an entire video on the weird history of Spider-Man variants.
Once again, stop adding things to your endless backlog. I'm sick of cataloging them.
But you may be asking how Japan's animation got insanely popular in the West in the first place. Simple answer, importation was a lot cheaper back in the day, and by and large it was far cheaper just to dub over an existing series from a foreign country and call it a day. And maybe make a few changes that the culture maybe disapproves of. Keep this in mind, it will be important later. Japan by and large was just the most popular. That's not to say other countries didn't have their shows imported to the West, it's just Japan was the most successful and most popular. The most popular anime to import is shonen anime, which literally just means young boy anime. And in case you're wondering, yes, there is a counterpart for girls, shoujo anime. These are your Sailor Moons, your Hello Kitties, etc. Yes, Hello Kitty is technically anime. But probably the biggest thing that did get imported to the West was Studio Ghibli films. And you'll never guess who is the distributor for these films. Disney! Keep this in mind for later, Disney has imported other animes as well. And yeah, do I really need to say anything more about Studio Ghibli films? They're well known, very artsy, and very well loved. But while the Ghibli films are well known and well loved, they have not made nearly as much of an impact as, say, your Naruto's or even your Dragon Ball Z's. I would say Dragon Ball, but the original Dragon Ball did not make that much of a cultural impact compared to Z. And I cannot understate Dragon Ball's cultural impact worldwide, not just in the West. If you think the West loves Dragon Ball, you should see the Hispanic chats. Their love for Dragon Ball goes far beyond anything else. But even still, their impact cannot be understated, because they fundamentally changed everything. But with that came distributors. There are two big distributors that I'm sure most people know about, that being Toonami and a very specific company that we're going to get into in just a second. But for now, let's talk about Toonami. Toonami's had a rich and long history with Cartoon Network, being its anime block for a good chunk of its lifetime. It remained on the main channel for quite a long time and actually did reasonably well. And then they tried to redesign him, and that ended up failing miserably. Nobody liked this design, and it was insanely expensive to produce on top of that. So Toonami got cancelled, and then brought back by Adult Swim. where it's actually still going to this very day, surprisingly enough. Toonami's definitely had its ups and downs, but I'm sure for a lot of people, this was their first exposure to anime as a whole. And while it's kind of a novelty nowadays with streaming services, as bad as they are right now, which we'll get into in a little bit, trust me, by and large, a lot of people discovered anime through Toonami, and it cannot be understated because of that. The other big company was 4Kids! I'm sure for some of you, you're shuddering in horror at the name 4Kids. As yeah, they're pretty infamous for a good reason. They may be defunct nowadays, but the impact they had on anime at the time was quite large and very notable. That's not to say all of the shows they had under their belt were anime. They had a few Western shows like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for instance, which you could also argue is a little bit anime inspired. They're pretty infamous for their censorship, which ranged from pretty okay to what were they thinking? I'm sure many of you One Piece fans probably remember the One Piece rap and the 4Kids dub. A big reason a lot of people don't like the 4Kids dub is that they tried to dumb it down and make it more kid-friendly. I haven't seen One Piece myself, there's no fucking way I'm watching that many fucking episodes. But from what I've actually seen of One Piece, it's a pretty goofy show, so it does make sense from a business perspective, but from a fan perspective, it's bastardization. You take away the cigarettes, you take away the guns, you take away everything. And then there's the One Piece rap, which you either love or hate. I'm not gonna give an opinion because I did not grow up with it. They didn't dumb down every show, it's just that they were very strict about that sort of thing. Sometimes. It also didn't help that they pretty much had a monopoly at the time. Some of them are pretty alright, like Sonic X or even Kirby Right Back At Ya, but I have not seen those shows in years, so I really cannot give an opinion. But the next two censorships we're going to talk about are polar opposites from one another. Let's start with the bad one, that being Pokemon. I don't need to explain what Pokemon is. You know exactly what Pokemon is. I'm not gonna waste your time. The Pokemon anime has received so much censorship over time, and generally that has to do with the fact that Pokemon as a whole has had a bunch of censorship over time. Some of it a bit more complicated, like the Jinx situation, but then you have episodes like Beauty and the Beach, which has that one particular scene that's pretty infamous. Yeah, I don't know why they thought that was a good idea, but I guess they did. Or even the Safari Zone episode, which had a literal gun? To quote Dr. Boros, "A gun? We can't give it a gun! Guns kill!"
That is the second time you've made that reference.
I really like Fallout New Vegas. I liked it before it was cool.
You sound like a hipster, you know that, right?
Moving on. Yeah, I don't know why they thought an actual gun was a good idea as well. It's not like a toy gun or like a laser gun. This is a straight up revolver. Like, they're not even hiding it. And yes, insert funny joke about American gun culture here.
Don't forget what the fuck is a kilometer.
I actually don't know what a kilometer is.
You disappoint me even more than usual.
But while those censorships were justified, something I don't think could ever be justified is the censorship of rice balls. Or as Brock calls them, jelly-filled donuts. These donuts are great! Jelly-filled are my favorite. Nothing beats a jelly-filled donut. Hey Brock, I think that drying pan fried your brain a little bit too much, because that's not a donut. This is a donut. This is a jelly-filled donut. This is a rice ball. And for some reason, 4Kids thinks kids are dumb enough to believe that this is not, in fact, a rice ball. This is a donut. Well, I'm sure most kids don't know what exactly an onigiri is, not to be confused with the VTuber onigiri, she's Chinese. I'm pretty sure most people can tell the difference, especially a stupid kid. You're not fooling anyone, 4Kids, you're just making yourself look really dumb. But the other notable censorship was in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's a lot of censorship in Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually, mostly a lot of cleavage, religious imagery, and various other things. This is completely unrelated, but I actually thought they changed Reaper of the Cards from something else. In the process of looking for the original name, I actually found out what the Japanese translation is, and you'll never guess what it is. Card Hunting Death God. That's fucking metal. That's completely unrelated to the current topic, I just thought I'd share that because I thought it was really interesting. But the biggest thing that was censored was notably hell, because yeah, you can't say hell, you can't send people to hell, you can't do any of that. But you obviously needed a solution for the show, So what do? You make it worse somehow. Yeah, this actually kind of fixed a notable plot hole with Yu-Gi-Oh! The characters don't really die. They get to come back almost every single time, so sending them to hell doesn't really make a lot of sense. But sending them to a state of limbo does actually make a lot of sense. Yeah, one of the most iconic things in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically didn't exist originally. It was censorship that created it. If I had a nickel for every time something iconic was created by accident by a censorship, I'd have 2 nickels.
And what would be the other one exactly?
The Grand Theft Auto box art, most notably. Yeah, Grand Theft Auto 3's original box art actually had to be censored, and what we got was the now iconic box art that's now pretty standard. Yeah, funny how that works, isn't it? But yeah, this is one of the few times where censorship actually paid off in the end. Kinda crazy to think that one of the most iconic things in anime probably wouldn't exist had it not been for 4Kids. And with that, we never get the "looks like you're going to the Shadow Realm, Jimbo." But as I said, 4Kids later went defunct. Oh, and in case you're wondering, no, it was not just the anime that got censored. Notably, the 2003 series of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles actually got hit pretty hard with censorship. Lost a few entire seasons, actually, due to censorship. It's also why there was a huge tonal shift in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fast Forward. Well, that's not to say every attempt to bring anime to the West was successful. Notably, a lot of classics from Japan were attempted to be brought over, but ultimately failed. A few notable ones include Astro Boy. Now, I'm sure a lot of you probably don't know who Astro Boy is, and to explain it, he's kind of the first anime, technically. Well, the first popular one, anyway. And he was hugely influential in Japan. Another one being Ultraman, which was attempted to be brought over, but didn't go very far. That's not to say he didn't have his fans in the West, though. Most notably Ben 10's creators. As notably Way Big is actually one giant reference to Ultraman. Even has that arm laser thing. Also notably in Omniverse, the mutated Waybads actually have a ton of anime references in them as well. Especially the female ones. Which, to be honest, I'm amazed that they were able to get away with that design.
Need I remind you Totally Spies existed and aired on the same network?
Oh yeah, you're right. That doesn't make it any better though.
Never said it did.
Although I'm not complaining about the design, I actually quite like the designs. It's just around this time cartoons got a lot heavier with censorship, but I'm kind of amazed they let this one slip, especially since the apparent inspiration is panty and stocking. If you know anything about that show, you know I'm amazed. Although I should probably point out that Ben 10 from Alien Force onwards definitely did take on a more anime style, both in general storytelling and in animation. And in case you're wondering what the Totally Spies comment from Mimo was, well, how do I word this exactly? Screw it, I'm just gonna say it. Some episodes are definitely the writer's poorly disguised fetish. Apparently the writers had a lot of fetishes. This show no doubt caused someone's sexual awakening. Is it any good? That depends. What are your fetishes? All jokes aside, I remember it being pretty alright. And you have France to thank for that. And Canada as well. So now I have 2 countries to blame. But yeah, that also wasn't an offhand comment by Mimo. This is actually related, as Totally Spies is semi-anime inspired. See, this was actually going somewhere. Oh, the final big series that we're gonna talk about that kind of failed to come over to the West was Doraemon. Doraemon's kind of interesting, but also a bit complicated. Basically, this robot cat thing from the future shows up, and now this kid's gonna go on wild and crazy adventures. There's a bit more to it, but I'm heavily paraphrasing for the sake of time. And yes, remember when I said Disney would come back? Yeah, they're the ones that distributed this on Disney XD. And they even censored the Japanese culture again. When will they learn that this never works?
When companies stop being stupid?
So never?
Correct.
Oh. But I mean, it did decently well. It didn't break any new ground, but it was still moderately successful. I mean, I liked it. And it introduced me to Doraemon. So, mission accomplished, I guess? Kind of? But with anime being popular, came its influence on the West. And other places as well. So stay tuned!
I love anime!
Yeah, and manga!
And gaming!
While the import of Japanese anime definitely has impact on the West, it was not the only place affected by the import of anime. Or in other words, you know who else got impacted by the import of anime? My mom! I'm sorry, I'm contractually obligated to make that joke.
No, you're not.
Well, they don't know that. Most interestingly enough, China, especially with MiHoYo. I've already talked about MiHoYo, so I'm not gonna go too in-depth into it. If you're interested, go watch the mobile games video. It should be popping up in the corner right about now, assuming I remember to put it in. But MiHoYo takes heavy anime influence, go figure. I should also point out Marvel Rivals. Because while the game is made in China, it does take heavy anime influence, most notably from the character designs. I should also technically point out that the Psylocke used in Marvel Rivals is actually the very Japanese-inspired Demon Days Psylocke, not really the Psylocke we're all familiar with. You can definitely tell from a lot of the designs that's very heavily anime influenced and very appealing designs at that. I don't have much else to say about Marvel Rivals, but I do have to mention it. And speaking of Marvel, there was a few times where anime did cross over with Marvel. There's quite a few anime shows featuring Marvel characters. There's a Blade anime, there's a couple Wolverine animes, there's an X-Men anime, there's an Iron Man anime, there's an Avengers anime, and there's also that show that by all accounts should have nothing to do with Avengers, but kinda does anyway. Also worth noting, in that said show, there's Deadpool. And you'll never guess who he's voiced by. Dio fucking Brando. Now that's a motherfucking JoJo reference right there. Also, huge missed opportunity for Marvel Rivals to include the anime skin for Storm. That's one of the best designs Storm's ever had. She's had some good designs. I don't know why, the short hair just looks really good on her.
You're just saying that because she has a big chest.
No, she has a really good design and looks really good in short hair. And she's hot. That's just a nice bonus. But the other biggest country affected besides, well, China, is debatably Korea. As yeah, the anime as an art style thing is kind of, well, pretty evident in Korean things. A lot of Korean webcomics definitely take inspiration, but are kind of their own thing. I can honestly make an entire video on that alone, because, yeah, the rabbit hole with Korean animation and Korean webcomics is kind of insane.
I am once again asking that you stop adding things to the backlog.
Although it wasn't just the Asian countries that were affected, it was also France! Wait, don't go yet! I understand the thought of France makes you visibly angry, especially if you're French yourself.
Dido, shut the fuck up! It's fucking English! Here! Go away! No French. Fuck the French.
As there was a few notable anime-influenced shows, most notably being Code Lyoko, which I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen. And yeah, it's a pretty good show, honestly. The 3D animation probably hasn't aged the best, but it's aged better than most of the early CGI. I'd say it's up there with Jimmy Neutron and aging very weirdly. It doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look good either. It's kind of in that weird middle ground. Although Code Lyoko doesn't have the greatest anime protagonist of all time in Hugh Neutron.
That is the second time you brought him up.
He's a really funny character, and one time he sat on a banana and it forever changed his life. There's also Wakefu, or is it pronounced Wakfu? If someone could correct me on the pronunciation, I would be very appreciative, because I don't know how to pronounce things already. I've got a terrible stutter, and pronouncing foreign languages is quite hard. But it definitely wears this anime influence on its sleeve. I haven't seen much of the show, but what I have seen, it seems really interesting and really cool. There was also an MMO which I have not at all played, but I'm sure if you're interested, you can check it out. But it's now time for the meat and potatoes. And we're all out of potatoes. Anime's influence on Western animation cannot be understated. So many shows would just not exist without anime's influence, be it in big ways or small ways. Small ways like the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles having some heavily anime-inspired facial expressions, to full-on shows that are basically anime in their own right. A lot of action shows very notably took inspiration from anime in one way or another. Shows like Symbiotic Titan, Motor City, and most notably Thundercats. Yeah, most people probably don't remember the Thundercats reboot, probably because it was short-lived, and also later got replaced by The Legends of Chima. But that and Ninjago is its own video in its own right.
Oh, you son of a cussing cuss word. If I had arms on this television, I would strangle you with them.
Although no doubt one of the biggest shows from the time that very much is anime influenced is Teen Titans. The original anyway, which I'm actually not gonna go too much into now because I actually have a future video planned on Teen Titans. Namely the Teen Titans Go retrospective I have planned after this. I will go into a lot more detail on Teen Titans in that video, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. But yeah, you can definitely tell Teen Titans had a lot of anime influence. Most notably being the theme song was actually done by a Japanese pop artist, Puffy Amiyumi, who actually got their own show on Cartoon Network, but I'm pretty sure most people don't remember that. And I haven't seen it personally, so I can't tell you if it was any good. I don't think it really ever aired, actually, now that I think about it. But then you had shows like Kappa Mikey, which were definitely wearing its influence on its sleeve. Once again, this is a show I've never seen because I've never seen it airing, weirdly enough. But from what I have seen from like clips and reviews, it's kind of mixed. And no, this has nothing to do with the Twitch emote, by the way. Sorry to disappoint you. But one show that definitely had a ton of anime influence and is actually argued to be anime itself is Avatar: The Last Airbender, otherwise known as the cooler Avatar. Yeah, this is an amazing show. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and go watch it right now. I don't care if you watch it on Netflix or torrent it or whatever you do yourself a favor and go watch this show. It's really good. It actually understands how to make good characters and good writing in a kid's show. This show could actually get pretty deep and philosophical at points as well, especially with Prince Zuko. You'd never see a character like Prince Zuko in a Western cartoon. Someone so angsty and flawed, yet not actually really a bad person, just heavily misguided. But honestly though, my favorite character has to be Iroh. There's just something about him that's just so fun. He's had his great moments and he's had his great comedic moments. He knows when to be serious and give you good advice, but he also knows how to make you laugh. He's also got some of the best lines in the entire show, both comedic and philosophical, such as, "Wisdom has always tried to catch up to you, but you've just been a little bit faster." Or even, "It's time you look inward and ask yourself the serious questions. Who are you? And what do you want to be?" Yeah, that line seriously goes really hard in context. His voice actor also unfortunately passed away, but the way the show utilized this to its advantage is insanely clever. You can definitely tell the writers knew exactly what they were doing. His voice actor also notably voiced Aku from Samurai Jack, which yeah, we'll get into in a minute. Yeah, the show had insanely flawed characters and that's what made them memorable. They were flawed, but they felt like actual people. That's something a lot of writers seem to forget nowadays. That your characters are meant to feel real, not realistic. And Avatar does that in spades. Even did a character with a disability really well, in the form of Toph. Yeah, she's a funny tomboy, and I love her all the same. She might be blind, but hell, she makes up for it in spunk and personality. Take notes, writers, this is how you actually write a character with disabilities. There's a ton of great moments from this series that I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. Although unfortunately, The Legend of Korra, its sequel series is kinda hit or miss. It had some interesting ideas at points, but almost always squandered them. It has its moments of genuinely good content, but is, for the most part, an inferior show. Which is kind of unfortunate, but oh well. Although I do have to bring up Samurai Jack, as I briefly mentioned it earlier. Yeah, this show might not take heavy inspiration from anime, but rather Japanese culture as a whole. It was also really good if you haven't seen it. It's very slow and oftentimes has the animation do a lot of the talking, which you would think would be boring, but this show does a lot more showing than it does telling. And there are many more I could go over, because its influence is that broad and that great. But that does bring up an interesting question. When did it stop? And why did it stop? The simple answer is Crunchyroll/Funimation, and the general state of anime streaming at the moment. Yeah, needless to say, there's a good reason why anime piracy is quite popular still. It's just a lot more convenient and you get a lot better service in Germa's pirate ice cream truck than you do something like Crunchyroll. Crunchyroll especially has been pretty notorious for being, well, really bad at managing the money and funding shows nobody asked for, instead of, you know, actually getting a decent video player for a good while. And Funimation, well, that entire thing with Funimation is insanely complicated. There is just far too much to cover with the shitty things Funimation has done over the years. And I'm also not gonna go over many of the actors of Funimation. Which, yeah, let's just say, don't meet your heroes. You might regret it. Especially the voice actor for Goku, he's kind of a dick at points. But one of the most notable things I do want to bring up from Funimation, just to show you how bad they truly are, was with the interspecies reviewer controversy. Now, if you've never seen the show,
Choose your words very carefully.
You see these gentlemen are off looking for fine services that these fine women of every species are providing, you see. And they are rating them. Yes, that is what they are doing. Yes, nothing bad is happening, YouTube. Please do not bonk me upside the head. And yeah, needless to say, Funimation was kind of a dick about it. They didn't air the series, nor did they make it easy for you to get it legally. In fact, it was far easier to watch it on places like a certain hub. And that's gonna be real confusing when I actually talk about the Hub TV channel.
Why, you little... Oh, it's not worth it anymore.
Well, yeah, Funimation were complete and utter dicks about the whole thing, and just said if we can't have it, no one else can! Except they had the rights and just wouldn't air it, which is incredibly stupid. And yeah, that's kind of the big thing. A lot of these streaming services kind of just buy up the rights and make it impossible to air the animes. And thus the practice has died out over the years as a result. Although one interesting thing has come up, that being YouTube. Now, YouTube's always been a place you can watch anime in really low quality, but in recent years, companies have actually ported over their animes to YouTube. There's not a lot of them, but some of them are actually pretty decent. Like, actually, I Am, a surprisingly good show that by all accounts has no right to be as good as it is. And even a really popular anime for a time, My Dear Friend Nokotan. Yeah, right here on YouTube. Fully subtitled and free. With advertisements. Yeah, isn't that crazy? What a time we're living in. But this has been a push for quite a while, it seems. As companies are finally realizing that they really don't need services like Crunchyroll, and instead moving to places like YouTube, where they can just host it themselves. So, yeah, that's kind of it, really. Anime's impact is quite noteworthy and has made quite an impact on everything, it seems. And whether that's a good thing or not, I'll leave up to you. But either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope to see you all next time. Oh, and in case you're wondering where VTubers fall into this, it's complicated and that's another video for another day before Mimo gets mad at me.